Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Anthony DiNicola. He, him, his are my pronouns. And I am the inclusion liaison for the Office of the Chancellor, as well as the coordinator of cultural communities out of the Multicultural Center here at the University of Arkansas. And I am incredibly excited and grateful to have you all here on the line for the first of the spring semester's Lunch and Learn series. I hope you all are comfortable wherever you are, eating and having a little something to sip on while you learn alongside me and your peers. Today, we are all very lucky to have Sarah Campau. She is my graduate assistant. She is an incredible scholar, just an awesome person to be around, and someone who has really been phenomenal at hitting the ground running in terms of helping to build some intentional programming around our LGBTQIA+ student community here on campus. I could go on and on, but I will allow Sarah to do some more introductions and to get started on this conversation that we are going to have today. And with that said, I'm going to turn my camera off and I'm just going to be monitoring the chat. So I may pop in if there's anything that I notice that I want to bring to Sarah's attention, but don't be afraid to ask any questions along this program. This session is being recorded. That is mostly so that we can use this as a resource for folks who can't be here today. But don't worry, we're not going to be sharing out names and who asked certain questions, but I just wanted to make sure that you all knew that going into this conversation. And with that, Sarah, I pass the virtual baton over to you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope you're having a wonderful lunch. I just want to start by saying you don't have to have your cameras on. You don't have to have your mics on. Well, I prefer you not to have your mic on. This is just like an opportunity for you to kind of learn along. Why do I get to talk about it? This is one of the areas that I actually work and study on. You can see some of my publications along the same lines that I had last year, just regarding pronouns and also LGBTQ advocacy. My career has really focused on that. I'm also a behavior analyst, which has taken me on a curvy road to get here, but I'm currently pursuing my PhD in public policy. And then I'm also working as a grad assistant here at the Multicultural Center. So let's see what we're talking about. We're going to go over some language and terminology because that's one of the biggest barriers, I think, of using pronouns in different ways and approaching individuals who may have different pronouns because we just don't know the language. We don't know the terminology. So I'm going to give us all some base language to work on, and then we're going to talk about some how-tos, how to integrate using pronouns all the way in your daily life. And then we're going to do some looking forward and some things that you can change. So one of the first things, I'm going to go back to my intro slide. I want you to notice that I had put my pronouns right next to my name. This is a really common thing that you can do. I didn't verbally say them, but they're right there, or I could have introduced myself as Sarah Campau. My pronouns are she, her, much like Anthony did his pronouns at the beginning. You'll also notice in my Zoom that my pronouns are listed, which is a feature that Zoom will now allow, and the university let us turn on. So if you feel so inclined, you can also add your pronouns. But let's start. Who uses pronouns? The answer is everyone. A pronoun is a word that we use to fill in if we have a proper noun. So have you heard from Tom? He has texted me all day. He is the pronoun. It replaces the proper noun of Tom. So we all use it. Like I said earlier, my pronouns are she, her. So Sarah goes to the store. She likes to buy milkshakes. I don't know. That'd be a great store. So some other terms and about gender identity that I think are going to be really important for you to understand moving forward. So cisgender is a universal term for individuals who identify their gender with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So to make it more layman's, I was born with female genitalia, and I identify as a female. So I am cisgender. Different to that, transgender would be individuals who don't necessarily match the sex assigned at birth. And similar to that, non-binary is someone who doesn't identify as either male or female because of the gender spectrum. And we will go into that a little bit. Don't get too worried and caught up on that. Misgendering is when you use the wrong pronouns for someone. It happens a lot more than you think. And the gender binary is just this idea, are there two, man and woman, or is there something in between? So it's really important that we use a lot of the same words so that, one, we're all talking about the same thing, we're all using the same language, but also because it's the respectful and right thing to do. So when someone asks, if you don't know, odds are you're cisgender. But once you do that reflection, you should be able to identify where you fall on that spectrum. Why does it matter? So for queer, gender nonconforming, non-binary people, pronouns are an important part of their identity, just like they are to us, except for we haven't necessarily had to think about our pronouns. I've been comfortable with she, her my entire life, and that's how I identify. So I don't have to put as much thought into it as someone who is maybe gender queer or non-binary or transgender. So let's look at the spectrum. Anybody who's familiar of LGBTQ circles in education has seen this graphic before. It's really important to delineate that there's a difference between gender identity, gender expression, physical attraction, and sex assigned at birth. Gender identity is how you think and feel. I mean, you can see he's thinking the little rainbow, right? Gender expression is the way that I present myself to the outward world. So today I'm wearing a dress, I'm wearing very feminine clothing. My gender expression is very feminine. That doesn't mean that I can't have a different gender identity and that maybe I'm just presenting more feminine today and tomorrow you'll see me in a tuxedo. The point is gender expression varies on how you dress. It's your outside look. Sex assigned at birth is the biological, and that's the science piece. And then the physical attractiveness, that's what determines an emotional attractiveness if someone is gay or not. Being gay has nothing to do with alternative gender identities. They're two separate boxes. Can you have an alternative gender identity and be LGBTQ as far as gay or lesbian? Absolutely. They don't go hand in hand and they don't have to. So it's really important that you recognize the difference between what we're talking about when we are talking about it, because they are different concepts. A person's pronouns do not necessarily match the way that they are presenting. First of all, you might be meeting them on the femme day. Maybe today's the only day I wear a dress. Or you could alternatively, they identify as gender neutral, and you could make an assumption based on the way that they look that fits in the gender binary. That's a lot of words to say there are alternates to she and her and he and him. This slide is not necessarily comprehensive, but it is does list the gender binary at top. Those are the ones that we most often are accustomed to in culture. These are the ones that we use very freely and confidently. When we get into gender neutral terms, that's where the confidence kind of wavers in people who are new to understanding gender identity and gender expression. They, them, theirs is the most common gender neutral set of pronouns. When I am addressing someone and I don't know what their pronouns are, I use they, them, theirs. It's it's the baseline, it's the gender neutral baseline. As you can see, there's others, Z here, here's. These, I want you to just know if you see them, what they're cueing you to. They're cueing you to somebody has a different gender identity than the binary. You can Google ways to say, Google how to say these words. If you see some pronouns that you don't recognize, Google is your best friend when it comes to different types of things in the LGBTQ community that you may or may not understand. I am one who definitely Googles what all the flags mean. And if I hear a saying that I don't know, I have to look it up, because the language is expanding and contracting, right? And it will continue to do that as people find the language to best identify themselves. And so it's just really important for you to see the different types of pronouns. Okay, I was just saw that there were some questions in the chat. I want to make sure we're good.
I got you, Sarah. Don't worry about it. I'm monitoring, and don't be afraid, folks, to ask any questions along the way. Either I can handle it in the chat, or we can pose it to Sarah.
Okay, so when introducing gender neutral pronouns, especially, we'll move forward using they, them, theirs, while also recognizing that there are others. The big question is, isn't that plural? Like, it doesn't feel comfortable coming out of my mouth, right? Like, these are things that I've even said. The answer is, it is plural, and it's also singular. And I can go through the LGBTQ extension of that and let you know that Merriam-Webster added it to the dictionary, and it's now part of the dictionary as a singular gender neutral pronoun. But it was used that way well before it was defined that way in the dictionary, and it's been used that way by all of us, whether you know it or not. So I like to do examples. Here is a firefighter holding a child. We don't know the gender of the firefighter. They are garbed up. I don't really care about the gender of the firefighter, right? I am seeing them as a public helper. So I can say the firefighter carried the boy to safety. They rushed him to the ambulance for medical care. They is the gender neutral, and I confidently am using it because I don't know their gender. So it feels okay with me. And a lot of people will actually do use gender neutral pronouns and don't even realize it. So instead, if we switch to this person who's also carrying a child, but we know that they use gender neutral pronouns. They identify as non-binary. So Gray, we're now going to name them. Gray carried the boy to safety. They rushed him to the ambulance for medical care. They is still the pronoun. It just looks a little bit different because we know his name. It's the same sentence. The thing with pronouns is that we're accepting that multiple people can use different pronouns based on how they identify. So here's my little practice one. Let's think about who can go to the park using gender neutral terms, right? They can go to the park. They can go to the park. So we feel comfortable with larger groups. They can go to the park as well. And this is just a single individual. They has a lot of flexibility built into it. And it's something that, like I said, we used it with the firefighter without a problem. The problem with being insistent on a gender binary, she or her, it takes away the ability of the other person to feel safe and seen as who they are. It is not our job to dictate how other people interpret their gender and their gender identity. So when you're asking, what are your preferred pronouns? That's actually not the right way to do it. And I wanted to make sure we cut that off right at the beginning. Okay, it's your pronouns. Preference implies that this is what I would like, but it's not necessary. The reality of it is pronoun respect is should not be a choice if you're respecting the individual that's sitting in front of you. Misgendering someone, especially intentionally, can be extremely harmful. And we're going to go over some of that a little bit later, but I just want to make sure that the language is, what are your pronouns, not what are your preferred pronouns. And I've used preferred in the past. This is another example of the language expanding and contracting a little bit. And so I also want to make sure that everybody's kind of aware that, like, you may get things wrong because of a change in language, but that's okay. I don't think most people are not offended by someone who is trying to respect their pronouns, right? The effort goes a long way. So when should you ask for it? How do you access this information? If we've decided that it's really important to respect another person's pronouns, whenever there's an interjection, there's an ability to sneak it in most of the time. I'm going to say broadly. So let's look at our two friends here and see some examples of different ways that they have used pronoun like questions. So this person, they've known each other for a while. Hey, I don't think I ever asked, what pronouns do you use? Sometimes I do this for people who I haven't known for a long time, or those people that you kind of know their name, but then you forget. And then like 6 months later, it's too late. You can still ask what their pronouns are. Lucia can introduce herself and put her pronouns right out there. She can also, when asking, like, hey, I just want to make sure I get it right. I do that a lot. Like, hey, my pronouns are she, her, and I want to make sure I get yours right. There's also the opportunity where you can do it as the third party. Hey, this is Diego. They use they, them. This is Lucia. She uses she, her. And you're kind of that intermediary, because what we want to do is make it normalized. We want it to be part of an introduction. We want it to be part of the way that you learn how to address someone. Because right now, we all do it, except for we make the assumption based on the way that the person looks. You see me, you assume that I use female pronouns, and you use she, her. What we're trying to highlight to people is that one additional question can go a really long way in making a person feel comfortable, making a person feel respected, and making them feel like they belong in a safe space. So
Sarah, I love the way you talked about sharing to learn, right? Hey, I use she, her, and I just want to make sure I use the right pronouns for you. That more often than not, when we put ourselves out there first and share that information in order to learn, it goes a long way to normalizing that idea that we all have pronouns. It's just, do we often ask enough? And that ask goes a long way. I love that you use that tool.
Thank you. It really is important, like, for the other person to feel that connection and to feel that level of respect. So what happens if you get an answer you're not ready for, right? What if they say, actually, my pronouns are he, they? We've just discussed that he is a binary pronoun use and they is a non-binary pronoun use. So what is this person doing? Are they tricking me? They're not trying to trick you. Trust and believe. The person is letting you know that they use both. And sometimes I've even seen he, she, they. That means they're pronoun indifferent and they're okay with any number of pronouns. You can alternate between the pronouns if they present them like that. He, they, he does this, they left their pencil over here. It's all about the same person. For some people, it's because of a comfort level. I'm comfortable with both of these. But for others, it may be a setting dependent use of pronouns. A lot of trans individuals or non-binary individuals may not be comfortable being out as a different gender identity at the workplace. And we will talk a little bit more about that too. But if you see something like this, first of all, go back to Google, honey, but also Like, I want you to be aware that it's not as complicated as it sounds. I think pronouns sound complicated to a lot of people. And I've had that conversation with people who say, I don't know what my pronouns are. And so it's like, well, step one, let's learn what a pronoun is. And then you can usually figure out what your pronouns are. What if I'm too nervous to ask? This is a whole new thing. What if I'm not comfortable with it? Well, first, I want you to know that you're not alone. You can see large, especially in older generations, the majority of individuals are uncomfortable using gender neutral pronouns to refer to someone, even if they're asked to do so. Here's the thing. Why is your comfort held at a higher regard than someone else's comfort who you are misgendering? Just kind of put that in your brain. You're not alone. It's okay to be uncomfortable, but I'm challenging all of us to kind of push through some of that uncomfort. Don't be too nervous, because yeah, that's how it works. You just tell someone not to feel a feeling and it totally works. I would like you to think that you can not be so nervous, but use gender neutral language until you pick up on clues. That might be the way that other people are referring to them or the way that they refer to themselves. I use gender neutral a lot when I don't know who someone is, like when I don't know or anything. And because it's the middle ground in theory is the neutral, respectful thing. And if there's something outside of the binary, then you're getting more specific. Yeah, listen to how they use them around, and practice makes perfect. You're gonna screw it up. You're gonna introduce yourself and then forget that to use your pronouns till later. You're gonna use wrong pronouns sometimes. It happens, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't keep practicing. So what if you do get it wrong? Because you will. I do. My personal story, my best friend recently began identifying as non-binary. I've known this person for years and years and years. I love and care for them deeply. I still screw it up. And it's okay. I'm going to continue to work to better for this person because I care about them and they're very important to me. But especially for individuals who you have this long-standing, pretty solid brain memory of a certain pronoun, it can be really difficult to break that, as opposed to if you meet someone in it right out the gate, their pronouns are they, them. I can get that. But the change, I still struggle with that. I don't want anyone to think that this is just like, you'll get it the first time, because you won't. If you do get it wrong, make the correction immediately. If I started using the wrong pronouns for my friend, I need to switch back to the proper ones as soon as I notice. Depending on the context, you can briefly apologize. This one, I want to put like 1,000 asterisks next to it. Your job is not to single out the other person. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I know you're non-binary and blah, blah, blah. No. The intention is for you to acknowledge and move on. You don't need to make them carry your additional guilt in their day to day. If you've got guilt, that's on you. Just don't overdo it. It's a mistake. We make mistakes. Sometimes it's appropriate to apologize in private, especially if you recognize that, like, oh, I've been misgendering this person for a really long time, or I misgendered them on stage introducing them. I can't run back up and go, oopsie, I did it wrong. It might be appropriate to apologize in private, but just like a lot of other things that make someone a little bit different, the goal isn't always to shine a spotlight on the difference. So we all know about pronouns now. We should just require it at the beginning of every class, at the beginning of every meeting, put it on your Zooms, everything, right? No, actually, the short answer to that is no. And a little bit longer answer to that is that it's still not necessarily safe for everybody. So we have all this great news about how, like, LGBTQ rights are moving forward, and this is the most progressive we've been, and LGBTQ people can now marry, and this is so great. We've got candidates who are LGBTQ, but the other side of the coin is there is still a lot of anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and legislation being passed. In this state alone, we have issues with transgender children being able to get access to care, as well as to be able to play sports. These rights are not automatically protected by the person that you're sitting next to. And so for some people, it can be uncomfortable to either come out as non-binary or as using different pronouns, and they may not feel safe. So this is not a debate about the rights of LGBTQ people. This is just a debate about the reality of their being, right? They're here, they identify this way. No laws or personal preference on your part is going to change their identities. But we do have to respect that still in the social climate, a person may not feel comfortable. So what about if we're addressing groups? This is one that I really struggled with when I first started transitioning into using more gender neutral language. I can't assume that everyone in this picture identifies as a female. So I spent years as a waitress. I still am a grad student. Hey ladies, what can I get you for dinner? That would be a very common thing for me to say. But unfortunately, that doesn't recognize the fact that there could be gender variances right in front of me. And I just made an assumption. So here's some gender neutral terms and the gendered version to the gender neutral. I still 100% struggle with this, but I've got some of my favorites. I use hey y'all now. I guess it's a benefit of being in the South. It's not as unusual. It's really difficult for individuals sometimes when their child identifies as non-binary. You're used to saying my daughter, my child. Honorariums, ma'am and sir, are very gendered. It's okay to say distinguished guests and use non-gendered, like postal worker instead of mailman. These little changes can make a really big difference, because even if that group was all ladies, it's not offensive to say, hey, yo, what can I get you? But if one of them is non-binary and I said, hey, ladies, then it does have the potential to harm. So you have to sit there and go, is, my comfort worth risking the potential to harm someone who's standing in front of me just because I may be uncomfortable?
Do you mind if I add in there? I use the term friends because, often people like the formality of sir and madam or folks you can, as another alternative, I love to, everybody's my friend until they're not, but even if they're not, I still can refer to them as my friend. And so I would love to challenge folks in the chat, if you have any terms other than folks or y'all or friends that you use, please put it in there, because the more that we can build that bank of terms, the better. I love trying to expand our vocabulary, because it's, we have to add more terms so that we can allow those new synapses to grow in our brain.
And the language is still developing. I anticipate that some words may go off into obscurity and some may be common, and people are just going to work on figuring out what language works best. I will say that you guys is the one I do all the time. It's very built into my Midwestness. One of the first conferences I ever spoke about, I was talking about transgender clinical care considerations. And I said, you guys, about 1 million times. And I was called out by one of the participants, like, you used a lot of gendered language. And they were right. And I initially, I was like, oh, And then I was like, yeah, no, I did that. Because I say you guys all the time. You guys, this is so important. I've had to learn to pull that back a little bit and hide some of that Midwest. That's why I added y'all. And I just want, so this is a tool that I've seen people use on social media where they go through and they'll fill out like, no, don't say that about me. Yes, maybe. I'm putting this on here as a point that most of us have preferences. Most of us would not just put yes for every single thing, right? I don't want to be called princess. It has nothing to do with my gender or my gender identity. I just, no thanks. We have things that we prefer or would like people to respect for us, just like anybody else. Once again, it just goes back to this commonality of like, if you're cisgender, if you're identifying the way that you look, you don't have to put as much thought into it as someone who is struggling to understand or better express their gender identity. So the point of this is really, truly that we all have things that we like to be called and don't like to be called. It's just less common that we have to stand up for that. If a mechanic came up to me and said, "Hey, princess," I would know instantly I want to shut that down, right? We have things that we don't want to be called. So you all have your mics off, which is fine. I just want you to practice. Put your name and then say your pronouns, like do it out loud. No one can hear you. Hello, my name is Sarah and my pronouns are she, her, or whatever your fill in the blank is, okay? I'm sure it sounded beautiful. I'm excited. You all sounded great. So why does it matter? This is the deeper dive. I keep talking about respect, and I'm talking about like making a person feel welcome, making a person feel safe. Those are all very altruistic, great goals. But the urgency and the need is more than just some fuzzy feelings. This can there is a correlation between lower rates of attempting suicide for people who have had their gender or sexual orientation affirmed in safe spaces. That should be enough. You're lowering suicide risk for an individual. Rejection on a whole is very difficult. And so it's studied through the lens of LGBTQ people, because through conversion therapy and social norms and conservative moral views, LGBTQ people are often discriminated against based on their identity. There are a lot of homeless youth as a result, and over half the youth in the US live in states where they could be forced to go to conversion therapy against their will. These, I think, are really important to understand the risks of rejection and the risks of not accepting, because not accepting is the same thing as rejecting. It's just a nicer term. The majority of people do not have their pronouns respected in their home. And they did a lot more studies on this in the 2021-2020 numbers because of COVID. More people were spending time in their homes. And that's why some of these numbers are specific to home, especially this year, because they really want to say, like, this is where you're spending most of the time. So as you can see, the majority of people do not have their pronouns respected in the home. If they were respected in the home, they attempted suicide at half the rate for those who didn't have anyone respect them for the way that in the home that they live in. This is important. This is what drives a lot of homeless LGBTQ youth. It is dangerous to be in a situation where you're not accepted, both externally and internally. If none of your pronouns were respected, we were up to a 24% suicide attempt rate. And if your pronouns are always respected, it's a 13%. Like, this is marked. This is significant. This is the same idea, except for they even spread it out of comparison of people who just respected their pronouns across the board. Let's get it out of the house. Let's say across the board. If no one respects your pronouns, you're at 28% suicide attempt. And if all or most, 12%. So it's wild to me just how much of a difference that it can make. The research is also showing that it takes one accepting adult in the terms of people 25 and younger. It takes one accepting adult to make the difference. It doesn't have to be a parent. It could be a favorite teacher. It could be a person. It takes one, which is actually really encouraging.
Hey, Sarah, can I just pause for a second? And I was talking to her. I want to really pause and highlight, because there was a really brave question in the chat about that the idea of I am very welcoming and opening of other people, but I don't always introduce myself with my own pronouns. And I just want to stop and highlight the statistics that you just laid out, that one accepting adult, just one singular person normalizing that idea of I am she, her, hers, and you are they, them. And I introduce myself with my pronouns. I have it in my email signature. It is not a big deal. Right. And the more we normalize things, it's not a big deal. When we say thank you when someone holds the door for us, when we smile at someone when we're walking down the sidewalk, it's not a big deal for most of us. But the fact that that small, almost insignificant moment in our day can potentially save someone from taking their own life or harming themselves is so unbelievably astronomical. And I think it is worth pausing for a second to really just highlight the fact that this is a huge change for ourselves in our way that we've lived our lives for however many decades we've been on this earth, but that the research shows that this change in our behavior can potentially save this group from taking their own lives or being harmed by others is so huge. And I really, really am so grateful, Sarah, for you highlighting these statistics and allowing us to challenge ourselves in that regard.
Yeah, I totally agree, Anthony. And one of the things that I would say to that as well is this is on cis people a little bit. This is on people who already know, and in many ways for people whose gender identity aligns with their pronouns. And because me normalizing it lets people know it's a safe space. It doesn't take a lot of bravery for me to identify as she, her, because there's very few people who would disagree with me on that. I think zero. I want to create the space that if somebody does feel comfortable, they can do that. And it's amazing. The statistic about one accepting adult is so significant. Like, to me, that has even relieved a lot of the pressure, because this seems like a lot, like, oh, this could really harm someone if we do it wrong or whatever. You're going to do more good by being a good person than you're going to do bad by screwing up pronouns while you're trying. They broke it down by communities. And once again, this is very much in response to COVID and people being at home. But the idea is access to affirming communities, especially rural youth or LGBTQ youth who live in states where the laws currently do not protect their autonomy and their ability for assent. So online communities have become important as the school communities kind of waver. They're not as consistent. And the home is actually becoming more important, which is not always the easiest thing to change. I think that's the most difficult area to get education into a home. Pronouns are one step access to changing names, access to binders if you're someone who is uncomfortable with the size of their chest or even having a chest, having access to non-binary clothing, all lower suicide rate. Like when I think of like religious communities with strict dress codes, women should be wearing dresses, that kind of forcing someone into a certain gender identity can be harmful. And that's not to say that someone shouldn't conform with a religion that they practice and care about, but we need to expand the way that we're thinking about what that looks like and what a person's presentation really has to do with their ability to interact in communities. Youth who attempted, this is the shapewear and the binders and stuff. If you have access to it, you're at a 14% attempted suicide rate versus if you have no access, you're at 26%. It's significant. I can't keep saying it enough. It's so significant. This level of acceptance, just across the board acceptance, can really make the difference for LGBTQ youth, all the way up through people who may be older or later in life, and recognizing that there now is language to describe what they're feeling. You're seeing a lot of people who may have felt trans in their younger years, but they didn't have the language, they didn't have the access, they didn't have the knowledge, they didn't know it was normal. Like there was this lack of accepting education to be provided. And truly in the earlier days, in the 70s, it was really popular to see conversion therapy research. In fact, conversion therapy for individuals who identify as homosexual was debated in the pages of Playboy because it was such a social issue at the time. And so to think that it's not a social issue now is a little bit wrong. We have the ability to impact our society and make this a more normalized thing. So looking forward, right? I feel like I've talked about how important and all this stuff. I'm giving you 3 things to try, and honestly, that'll make a world of difference. First, start introducing with your pronouns every time you remember. If you don't remember, you don't remember, but the more you practice, the more often you'll do it. I now, whenever I, start a class, I make sure I do it because I know like, this is a great time to do it. This is a great time for me to practice. Never assume anyone's pronouns. This one is really important as far as respecting individuals who are non-binary or respecting the fact that we can't visually determine someone's gender identity and pronouns. And include pronouns in email signatures or for any professional correspondence. I always try to make sure that it's in there. I've gone to conferences where there's been debate and they end up providing stickers. Like there's a bunch of different ways to approach this. For me, the biggest one is access, creating a space where you can feel comfortable identifying your pronouns or making that space. So I have some examples. So the University of Arkansas provides this template that you can use for your signature. This is the only one that really identifies that the alternative information could be your pronouns. So it's kind of there, but it's kind of not. I know when I first started, I emailed them and I was like, can more of your examples have pronouns, right? The same thing for name tags. It's very common to put she, her, and I'm talking about conferences, all those types of things. If you can make that extra effort, it will make the non-binary person next to you, whether you know they are or not, feel like they have at least an ally. They do it on business cards, although not many people do business cards anymore. Buttons are a very common thing to see, especially on young people. Ask me about my pronouns, or the listing their pronouns. That's your cue. You can respect it right away, right? There are lots of ways that we can do this. and just normalize it. Like I said, normalizing is going to be one of the best allyships that we can do, especially as individuals who identify as identify with the sex assigned at birth. So that is my overview. I see there's a lot of chats. Are there any questions or comments or fill in the blank, anything?
Sarah, while people are thinking about some questions, I just wanted to highlight there were a couple of really great things that were brought up, and I want to ask one in particular to see if you have any ideas on it. Someone asked, traditionally, where do you put, like, in your email signature, your pronouns? And I most often see it at the very end, right? So Dr. Jane Doe, PhD, MS, all of her incredible papers that she has. And then at the very end in parentheticals, pronouns. That's more often, or I put it right underneath someone's name. Have you seen it any other ways, or any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, mine is kind of underneath, and then I'll bold it or make it a different color. I've had a lot of variations because I haven't always worked in workplaces that I could have it as well. So this is a newer thing now that LGBTQ rights are protected in the workplace as of 2020. So you're going to start seeing more, and I think you're going to start seeing more like ways that people, I think we're going to end up standardizing it at some point. That's my guess.
I love that. Thank you. And the other one, and this was one that I responded to, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. The fear, right? And this is a very honest fear that people have, is asking or saying introductions and someone saying, well, can't you tell that I'm whatever, she, her, he, him, and someone feeling like they're disrespecting someone by asking their pronouns. And I said, that was my fear as well when I first started asking and introducing myself that way. But I've never actually had anyone have that response out loud to me. But that's why I often talk about sharing, right? Like, hi, I'm Anthony DiNicola, he, him, his, and let's go around the circle and just introduce ourselves, name, pronouns, and whatever else information is pertinent to that meeting. Do you want to speak a little bit to that fear that might be in the room?
So yeah, I can totally understand that. The only time that I've ever had a negative response is when someone doesn't know what a pronoun is. They tend to be a little bit defensive. Like I had someone that I worked with, her son had to put their pronouns in an email. He didn't know what they were. So he was really insulted that he was asked. And so was his mom, who talked to me about it. And I was like, whoa, you both need to back up. He identified his pronouns as Celtics lover because he thought it was nobody's business who he loves and doesn't love. So he's going to identify as someone who is a Celtics lover.
Oh, so they confused sexual attraction with.
Correct.
Okay.
That is the thing that I see the most often. And so, like you said, in order to counter that, I will say my pronouns are, and hopefully they can catch that, like, oh, pronouns don't mean that I'm gay or anything else. It's just literally my pronouns. I absolutely loved trying to refer to them as Celtics lovers as their pronouns, because it was my favorite. Like, those are my favorite pronouns.
And now we know that this was in the Boston area. So as a native Bostonian and lover of all things Larry Bird and Celtics, I can totally understand an unabiding love for that basketball team. But that has our pronouns, our gender expression, any of those things have nothing to do with who we're attracted to emotionally, sexually, whatever. And that I think that is such an important thing, going back to that, the genderbread person or the unicorn, right? That we have to have that understanding that these are separate things rather than interconnected.
Brain development continues until 25. So you have a lot of personal growth still happening. I know that as a person who grew up in a rural area, I had never talked to a Black person, a gay person, pretty much any person of color, because I was so isolated. And then when I accessed college, it was like, oh, there's a lot more ideas, but also different from when I went to college. When these kids are now entering colleges, they have better online communities, which is one of the reasons that the Trevor Project started to get interested in looking at where people were finding their support. So you'll find the people that know, especially the younger people, because they took the time and they're in these communities, and usually they surround themselves with queer friends and they're very fluent. And then everybody else is kind of afraid to say it because what if it makes you gay or something? Like there's this idea that knowledge will somehow convert or something. People just don't necessarily know, and people are afraid of what they don't know. So for me, it's just more important to continue to normalize it, and I think that will provide its own level of education. For myself is keeping it. I sometimes keep my.
So Sarah, do you want to, we don't need to list out names, but I'm just going to pose the question because the question is keeping it anonymous, I'm assuming pronouns, ever professionally acceptable, like using initials instead of full names. Sometimes there are submissions made by those whose identity is known as she, her, or not known as she, her, would get less respect. So basically I'm hearing in a culture that doesn't normalize they, them, or non-binary pronouns or identity, are there still going to be folks who might either use code, right? Like sometimes initials can be code, not always, of course, or just not putting it out there to stay under the radar.
I mean, as a female in the business world, a lot of us have had to make different kind of considerations to make sure that, you know, we're undercover with certain identities or whatever, because we talked about it. There are certain people that may not feel comfortable. I would challenge back though and say that as a cis person, it is a lot easier for me to be that person than it is for a trans person, because there's this level of self-disclosure, and we all get to choose throughout our day how much we want to disclose about ourselves. Unfortunately, trans people, if they are not passing, or if they're earlier in transition, or any number of things, they are going to feel that miscomfort over and over and over again, because they're going to be experiencing it based solely on the way that they look. So is it acceptable to sometimes like hide? Sure. Not passing. Oh, just to be clear, not passing is if someone were to identify as female, but when you're looking at them, society would be like, that's a man. Something as simple as like a woman with a beard is still a woman if they identify as a woman, but that person would not be considered passing. They wore a dress and a beard, people would go, something's different here. So yeah, that's the difference between passing or not. And I have a privilege of being a white lady who passes as a white lady and who can interact in spaces like that. And that's why I personally carry a little bit extra, like, here's the privilege that I can walk in the door with and use. It may not be a lot as a queer LGBTQ person, but I still got white on my side. I still got some other like things that make me less likely to face different types of discrimination, and I'm going to use it. And this is one of the ways that I can.
And Sarah, I think that that's a really great way to end this session, is to think that this is our opportunity to use that little bit of privilege that we have, that it might be uncomfortable, right? It might be a couple extra clicks on your keyboard to make sure that your pronouns are on there. You'll forget about it, right? It'll just be there and you won't even realize it anymore. But that to you aren't even thinking consciously about it. But for those who need to see that, to feel that sense of belonging and that they matter here at this institution, at the University of Arkansas, and then into the greater world, it has been potentially the one thing that could save them from harm. We host a National Coming Out Day event here, and that is, you know, it has something to do, for some folks, coming out is coming out as trans or non-binary perhaps, but more often than not, we think about coming out as saying to the world, I am not heterosexual, because the assumption is that everybody's heterosexual until proven otherwise. That this is another revolution, right? That we are all having to come out as cisgender, as trans, as non-binary, as all of those things. And for a lot of us, we aren't used to having to do that. But what Sarah has so brilliantly pointed out is in doing that, in facing that little bit of different or discomfort or change or challenge, we are potentially lifting up and saving the lives of countless people. And that is an incredible gift that we can give to folks that we may never personally know. And so that is a really, really awesome way to leave this, to think, wow, this is a little something that I can do that can go a huge, long way. And so I look forward to additional questions that folks might have. And for those who are watching this later on YouTube, I will post both Sarah and my contact information. And for those who are here in the presentation today, thank you so much for being here. You can see Sarah's contact information. Mine is anthonyd@uark.edu. And we absolutely welcome any other follow-up questions that you might have, and continue to look out on Newswire and the MC Instagram page, UARK_MC. That's on Instagram, and you can find out about other sessions that we will be holding this semester. We have one coming up on Two-Spirit identity that we are really excited for. So we will talk soon. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Have a great day, everyone.